Well, welcome everybody. I am Dan Chibnall. I'm at Coles Library at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, and we are presenting from zombie citations to research revolutions, how AI slash ChatGPT is changing what we do in libraries. And so I want to let my two co-presenters introduce themselves now. So go ahead, Roz, Sarah.
All right. So, hi, my name's Sarah Morris. I'm a librarian and based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I currently work at the Carter Center here in Atlanta, working on media literacy projects. And I'll hand it over to Roz to introduce herself.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. I am Roz Tedford. I'm Director for Research and Instruction at the ZSR Library at Wake Forest University and teach courses on mis and disinformation. And that is how the three of us met several Charlestons ago. And so I'm excited to be back with our panelists to talk about, sort of in broad strokes, the AI ChatGPT revolution.
Thank you both so much. So I'm going to give a brief overview of what we're going to be doing today, and then we will each take a turn going over the big areas of our specialties. So we understand that artificial intelligence isn't new, and everything right now is very dynamic at this point. But we wanted to kind of help all of you as much as possible with understanding where we are currently in libraries with artificial intelligence and chatbots and kind of where we're headed. And then there's also this issue of the silo effect. And so we don't often think about the other areas of our campuses or even our libraries. So we don't want to pretend to be experts on like artificial intelligence in general or ChatGPT in general, but more as it relates to the things that are happening within our libraries or things that happen with library-related instruction. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So this is intended as a broad overview of how AI affects libraries right now. And we understand that by the time you see this, maybe something else has happened. But there'll be other folks who do deeper dives on this at the conference. So take what we're going to say as part of a larger whole or one part of the trail you're hiking on, and then blaze your own trail off of that. So hopefully some of what we tell you today gives you some good ideas that you could take back to your campuses. So now I will hand it off to my colleague, Sarah.
All right. Thank you, Dan. So as Dan noted, AI is certainly not a brand new thing, and it's definitely not new in libraries. And I think it's been interesting to see how we might be looking at tools we've been used to using in a new light because of the current moment we're in with generative AI and ChatGPT. So some tools, even Microsoft Office tools that we're used to using, the PowerPoint Design Assistant feature, for example, or spell check, LibAnswer's chatbots, for example, things that we're fairly used to that are powered with various AI technologies. Grammarly is another example that comes up often. So what we're seeing now, though, that's interesting is older tools sort of adopting new AI features or highlighting existing features in a way that kind of capitalizes on this current AI moment we're in. So for one example, Wikipedia has actually used AI tools for quite a while. They have a tool called ORES, which is a tool that ranks the quality of edits on Wikipedia. And I've noticed that's been getting kind of more attention in conferences and things, given the kind of AI revolution we're in. Turnitin is now boasting a whole new suite of AI-powered features. We can talk more about that in a moment. And Tableau, which I'm sure many people use for visualizations at their library, has also launched AI analytics. So it's really coming at us from all directions and all sorts of tools and things we use. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what's sort of happening right now? We're seeing, again, that trend of maybe existing tools that we've used in research, instruction, other library systems, kind of either embracing or highlighting AI aspects of their work. But we're also starting to see a rise in new generative AI tools for academic and scholarly research purposes. So things like Semantic Scholar, Research Rabbit, and Elicit. These all are trained in slightly different ways as opposed to, say, ChatGPT, which sort of trained off of sites like Reddit, for example, or Wikipedia. Many of these tools are training off of more academic or scholarly literature. Some of them are a bit more niche focused on, say, medical sciences or environmental science, for example. But this is certainly an area to keep an eye out on because I think a lot of our students are going to start testing things out. Maybe you'll be asked to work work with something in an upcoming class and compare how this works as opposed to, say, Google Bard or Microsoft Bing tools or things like that. But the sort of academic landscape is definitely, I think, seeing the shifts and sort of mirroring some of the trends we're seeing in maybe the broader sector in terms of AI and generative AI tools. Other things that are happening across our campuses and in other educational spaces, certainly an uptick in courses dedicated to AI, endless debates on AI policies on campus and when and where to use certain tools. A lot of work being done around AI literacy and what that should even entail. And Roz will talk more about this, but different players in the library research landscape, SpringShare, EBSCO, et cetera, all working on new AI initiatives and tools. So there's a lot to keep track of, and it can certainly feel a bit overwhelming at times. All right, so I wanted to highlight a few implications for research with AI, and then my other fabulous panelists here will talk more about instruction and library systems. But as we noted, libraries, so much of our work can overlap and go into different territories. So research work dovetails into instruction often, but there can also be silos in place too, and you might not necessarily know what conversations are happening in different arenas. So we hope this provides you with some questions to keep in mind and just sort of an overview of some different trends and aspects of AI that you could sort of think further about. So there's huge implications for research across campus in terms of generative AI tools. It could change how we conduct research and how we engage in the process of search and discovery. And there's so much more just to be discovered here and experienced as we're all sort of testing out these new things. And as Roz noted, new tools are coming out all the time. So something could happen in the next couple of weeks that changes this again. But I think, some other areas to really pay attention to include how commercial tools like, say, ChatGPT could pose challenges for source evaluations. I'm sure many of you have seen work coming out about AI hallucinations, which is a growing area of concern. In a nutshell, a hallucination is when an AI tool like ChatGPT generates a response that is either made up in part or in full. So it could be a citation where it's a real author, but a made up title. It could be a fact that isn't correct, but this can pose real issues if people are trying to get their sources and go through the process of source and discovery or search and discovery with an AI tool. Aside from sort of using these AI tools, I think it's worth paying attention to how interest in AI might start driving research agendas, how many new dissertations are going to be written on this and courses being taught. Are there ways to use it more productively, such as for brainstorming or keyword development? And really for us, what do librarians need to know to equip people to utilize AI tools, understand how they could possibly be used, and help navigate this new research landscape? All right, so a couple of just trend areas I thought were worth highlighting before we get into instruction and other systems more. So first, in terms of just reference services, research consultations, the reference desk, what we're starting to see, I think, and things worth paying attention to are, one, just the questions patrons might start having regarding AI. You've anecdotally and in the library literature, you're already seeing people spotting issues like AI hallucinations and people coming in with bogus citations. So I think there's going to be work to be done on coaching patrons on using AI tools effectively, even incorporating that into reference interviews in terms of asking sort of where did that source come from and kind of talking through maybe what that process is, how a tool like a ChatGPT differs from a library database or search engine and why you might be getting the result you're getting. So explaining those differences and really just keeping track of new types of questions and trends at service points and libraries. So I think there's definitely some data collection work to keep track of that to be done in the future. Some other areas just for awareness, again, we're seeing more and more campuses launch AI centers and initiatives and courses. So even just thinking about instruction sessions that could come up or research topics that people might be doing or collection needs around all these issues with AI is certainly another area to keep an eye on. There are also some campuses have policies that might limit or even prohibit certain use cases for AI, or on the other hand, embrace it. And so sort of knowing what the conversation is and ideally getting libraries involved in those spaces as it regards instruction and research in particular, I think is going to be well worth keeping an eye on. Really paying attention to those more academically oriented AI. I'm a bit of a skeptic with some of these things, but some of them could be very promising and useful. But again, it's well worth having your critical thinking hat on and sort of asking questions about how this was developed, what was it trained on, what are we seeing here, just so you know how to engage with students around tools like, say, Semantic Scholar. And finally, just navigating concerns. I think this can be a confusing topic and even an emotional one for people. People can be very enthusiastic or alarmed by AI tools. And so just within our library spaces and with our colleagues and in conversations with faculty and students around research, I think this is just going to keep coming up more and more. And so keeping track of trends and hopefully finding spaces to learn more, I think will continue to be of importance for libraries. So those are just some research trends that we've been noticing and came to mind. And now I'd love to hand it over to Dan to talk more about things we're seeing in the more instruction space.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And that was very helpful too for myself, because I learned a little bit there too. So hi, everybody. I'm Dan. I'm the STEM librarian and associate professor of librarianship at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. So I teach my own standalone courses. I have 4 different courses that I teach. And then I also do all the STEM work with STEM faculty and students. So I teach one-shots. I do embedded librarianship work. So I do a lot of instruction. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how me and a few of my colleagues have been approaching AI and chatbots and ChatGPT as it relates to information literacy. So I'm going to talk about my experiences working with faculty and working with students in my classes, in my one-shots, helping faculty set up new assignments, new activities, those kinds of things. So to start off, my colleague Priya Shenoy and I, we developed a research guide to kind of focus solely on how AI on our campus is sort of affects information literacy. So how do we look at this through an information literacy lens? And we mainly wanted to do this because we are the Center for Information Literacy work here on campus, and also because we actually have an artificial intelligence program here at Drake that students can get a degree in. So we wanted to make sure that students and faculty understood that there was a distinction between what we do with the smaller umbrella of AI and information literacy and the larger umbrella of AI overall. And that way everybody wasn't beating down our door to sort of figure out what AI does. So that's helped immensely. And the most important thing that we've been working on with faculty is to kind of help them adapt their activities, lessons, assignments, and class examples to sort of help students understand AI's role, especially ChatGPT, in seeking, evaluating, using information. So one of the first things that we do is we talk about the fact that ChatGPT is a large language model. And so its job is first and foremost to generate text, and it's not like a sentient computer. Like some of the students in my science fiction class keep thinking like, oh, ChatGPT is like it's a thinking machine, and that's not really what it's doing. So we want to make sure that the students understand what its limitations are. And so one of the things that we ask or that we get questions from faculty about is how might students be using ChatGPT if they don't know that it's a large language model? And so we see students using ChatGPT as sort of another type of search engine to find resources. And this can be tricky because, like Sarah mentioned, it's been known to use fake resources that it generates itself. And obviously, this is problematic for a number of reasons, but especially because it prevents students from being able to use their own information literacy skills of retrieval, evaluation, application. Students obviously may also may use ChatGPT as a time saver, right? And the software can easily do a homework assignment for them, but by doing that, the student is, again, not learning or strengthening any of their skills. They're just moving information from point A to point B. And so with all that in mind, again, one of the biggest things we remind both faculty and students is that ChatGPT is not a search engine. It's not designed to do the things that a search engine does. So for example, when using a traditional search engine like Google or PsycInfo or PubMed, you get to actually see the results. You sift through them and you apply your information literacy skills towards what you're seeing. But with ChatGPT, you don't see the sources. You get a compilation of information from those sources. So there's a new extra layer between you and the information you're trying to find. That new layer means more digging. That makes it more difficult to apply information literacy skills because you're not actually looking at the sources. You're looking at something through a lens that ChatGPT generated. So how often does this happen? So recently, back in August, in a paper from August 8th in the JAMA Network Open journal, researchers found that ChatGPT did not do so well when it came to citation generation. So I'm reading directly from their results, which read, from the default GPT 3.5 model, 162 reference journal articles were fact-checked, 159 of which were verified as fake articles. From the GPT-4 model, 257 articles were fact-checked, 53 of which were verified as fake articles. The error rate of reference citing for GPT-4 was significantly lower than that for 3.5, but it remains non-negligible. Narrower topics tended to have more fake articles than broader topics. Now, obviously, that speaks for itself. This is a staggering amount of false information, and demonstrating this issue to students helps them to understand the difference between actually working on their information literacy skills and their writing skills rather than attempting to use GPT as a search engine. So GPT also doesn't always summarize information correctly, or it sort of misstates it or it distorts it. So, for example, in a Nature article by Van Dis in February of this year, the researchers experimented with asking GPT a question from their research area of interest. They asked GPT to summarize an article they had written, and they found that GPT listed incorrect and incomplete information and interpreted the article inappropriately. And so it basically it just made up language that did not correlate with the results of the studies that these researchers had done. Or in another example that I recently ran into, a physicist made up the name of a subatomic particle and asked ChatGPT for more research on it, which ChatGPT gladly provided, even though the subatomic particle doesn't exist. So we see that GPT doesn't accurately summarize information. It misstates it, it distorts it. And it's important that students understand that so that they don't heavily rely on it because of those mistakes. So what's the flexing muscles analogy? Well, students ask me, should I use GPT when I'm writing a research paper? And I say, it depends on what you're asking it to do. And I say, since researching and writing are two important skills that you want to strengthen while in college, you don't want a machine to do it for you. Just like if you want to build muscle, you have to lift weights. You can't have someone else lift the weights for you. If you sign up for a gym membership and then you just go there and watch other people without doing any workouts of your own, then you're not improving. You're not building anything. You're not building muscle. You're not building skills, habits, ideas, knowledge. You're just a passenger. So I tell them, don't be a passenger, be a driver, be a pilot, be the person who creates, builds, and analyzes. So flex your muscles, your mental muscles. You don't want to just offload that onto a machine. And so, we learn a lot better and strengthen our skills when we put ourselves into a state of mind that focuses on critical thinking and analysis. If you use GPT too often, you're not allowing yourself to get into that state of mind. So what are some of the other implications for teaching and learning here? So one of the things we really reinforce with faculty who ask us about this is we say, for your students, help assist them in breaking down a complex topic into simpler components. That's something GPT can do. GPT can also provide faculty with outlines for lesson plans. It can organize. It can show relationships between unrelated topics, or even help them find author names on specific research. Obviously, you have to double check these things for accuracy, but it can save you some time in that way. We also think it's really important, and I've already touched on this a bit, but to show students examples of what it can and can't do. So, active learning with ChatGPT in the classroom can be really beneficial because it shows students the mistakes that are common with the software. And so we tell faculty, make sure to emphasize that GPT is just a tool. And like with all tools, we have to learn its limits, as well as how to identify overuse. Overusing a tool can result in a poor product. And so that's why it's important to sort of identify how is GPT going to be used in your course. So I would encourage you to visit one of the best sites I've run into is on Texas A&M's Center for Teaching Excellence. They have a lot of really good examples of how to put into your syllabus how you're going to use AI in your class. And there's three primary categories for that. There's basically no use of generative AI at all. There's circumstantial use. We're going to use it a little bit. And then there's broader use. And it really depends on what you're trying to do. And one of those things that you can do is show students an active learning experience, like have ChatGPT sort of create some writing samples for students to critique, revise, and analyze during class. This helps them to see the limitations of the software, But it also allows them to then see what it can do well, and it gives them practice critiquing someone, or in this case, something else's writing ability and research ability. And then finally, I like to help students think about using GPT as a comparison tool. So I encourage them to ask their instructor, what are the rules regarding use of AI in this course, right? Course A may have a very different use for it than course B. And it may be more valuable for a variety of reasons. So for example, think about how you currently search for information. You don't want to use GPT as a search engine, but you could ask it simple questions like, how is X related to Y? And then read its answers and try using that as a jumping off point. So finally, think of it as a tiny assistant that doesn't do the work for you, but gives you little ideas to act on and write on. And with that, I will now pass it off to my colleague, Ross.
So I'm Ross Tedford, and I'm Director for Research and Instruction, and I am a sort of traditional sort of liaison instruction librarian as well. But we also wanted to make sure in this presentation that we were touching on the things that sort of make it possible for research and instruction, right, to happen, which is all of the other things that libraries do. And so we wanted to look into those things outside of research and instruction where AI is coming, has already arrived, and what maybe it might change about what libraries do. And I selected a few examples. There are many, many more of these, but I selected some that I thought were particularly salient. And then some questions, and then I'll go and wrap up with some questions, some overall questions, and then we look forward to your question. So there are some AI products out there that are coming, but I wanted to say beforehand that our big vendors, a lot of our big vendors, are AI companies, or moving towards AI companies that have a library business on the side, that AI is becoming a bigger and bigger part of their base research. So I went out and, being the librarian that I am, looked up what a few of them have to say on their websites about who they are. So Clarivate says, right, and that's right, Clarivate, that is ProQuest, that's Ex Libris, right, that's all of those. Global leader interested in transformative intelligence. We bring together enriched data, right, insights, analytics, workflow solutions, grounded in expertise across a spectrum of knowledge, right? So they have large chunks of their business that is not specifically providing us with our ILSs and our like ProQuest products. LexisNexis, right, has the library side, and then it has the other side that says for companies and government agencies seeking data analytics, supporting compliance, customer acquisition, fraud detection, health outcomes, identity solutions, investigation, management, risk decisioning, and workflow optimization. All of that side of LexisNexis, right, is leaning really heavily on AI. And Elsevier says, as a global leader in information and analytics, Elsevier helps researchers and healthcare professionals advance science and improve health outcomes. So a lot of what Elsevier does on the health outcome side, right, is leaning on AI. So these are companies that are in the AI space, even if their products towards libraries are not specifically AI right at this very moment. So I think that's an important thing. But there are systems out there that are some things that libraries do that might be worth considering. So one is an increase of AI usage in things like indexing. And some libraries, my library doesn't, but some libraries out there do provide indexing services for faculty, or have faculty who are doing research who come to them and say, hey, I need help with indexing. And one of those things that indexing requires, right, is that ability to look not only at the frequency of a word, but the context around that word to determine if that usage of the word is important enough to include it in an index. So when you think about a large language model that is based on, say, academic books specifically, there might be some usage there, right, where using AI and indexing could help with what is really a particularly tedious task in the research timeline. And I know very few people who are like, yay, now I have to index my book. So I thought that's an interesting one. There is a growing area of having sort of AI assistants in locations where human beings are not, right? So this link that I have, and we'll upload our slides to the system so people can look at this, is really for a middle school library that has sort of a what's kind of like an Alexa assistant where students can ask it questions and get help in areas that are not the media center in the school. But you can see this being like replicated over and over again, that you can have sort of outposts of chatbots and outposts of AI systems where you don't physically have someone there to answer questions. We use a product called OccuSpace for space analysis here here at ZSR, and they offer right now sort of traditional sensors that determine how, through a very complicated process, how many people are in the space and what your occupancy rate is. But what is coming down the pike for them, they just sent out, are things like predictive modeling, heat maps, and that sort of stuff. So you can see in the determining how your space is being used, that used to require a human being to walk around and click and make notes, that something like AI could ultimately come into that space and be helpful and sort of remove the need for human beings to do that. There are better marketing design tools. Canva now has a image creator. There's a lot of ethical issues in there, but you can create AI images. You can go into Canva and say, I need an image of, someone studying at a table, and they can and Canva can do that for you, which levels the playing field for some libraries who don't have huge budgets to purchase larger content to marketing or design tools. There are ways, and a lot of sort of purchasing decisions have already got some AI built into them, but there are even larger ways that you can have analysis of gaps in your collections. We're going to talk about collection audits in a minute in another way. But these things, as you can see, if you were looking at comparing yourself to other libraries, large data models that can say, here are some things you might like to purchase based on all these other things. The better the AI gets in that space, the easier it might be, especially for smaller libraries who don't have 10 people all able to go and look through things. Could be useful. And the last one is metadata creation, which is a tricky thing. Right now, we think of metadata as things that we need to look at I'm thinking mostly for digital collections, look at the item, create that metadata based on all sorts of context clues. But I think that AI in the metadata creation space is a place again, where it can really help libraries that don't have huge staffing. These AI tools could help fill in a gap. There's never going to be enough humans to create all the metadata we need. I'm sure people listening know of a lot of other tools out there. These were some of the ones that I came across that I thought were interesting. I think there were a lot back in sort of January. There were a lot of, oh my gosh, what's coming for libraries? And so I read a bunch of those, like, here are the, top 10 ways that AI is going to change libraries. And some of those, are going to come true, and some of them aren't, as usual. One of the things that I saw that was just sort of could we get AI to the point where it could do some more, sort of complex tasks that take up a lot of time? And one of the things it suggested was, could it analyze, for example, licensing agreements? And maybe there are places out there where this is already happening. But I know at a lot of libraries, including ours, that sort of licensing a new product from a new vendor can be really complicated, and you need, legal expertise. Could there be some things coming that I do think collection audits, especially for things like diversity, are going to come through the AI space. Right now, I think the metadata that exists in our databases are a little bit weak on that. I have students, I'm working with students right now in a Politics of the Global South senior seminar, and they have been told they have to use only voices from the Global South, and we don't have metadata in our databases right now that say the home country of this author is this place. And so that, I think, with increased metadata on some things, then I do think collection audits are going to get sort of better and better with AI. And the other thing that I heard sort of, oh my gosh, this is going to come, is the idea of sort of smart libraries along those models of the Amazon stores, Amazon markets, where there were no people there. And of course, some of those have closed because they were a disaster. But I think I'm sure they're back to the drawing board on that you could see if someone had a library card and there was a kiosk and the library card got them into the kiosk, and then they could check out their own books and leave, you could get materials to people where you don't normally have full libraries. Now, the flip side of that, is that going to be seen by some places as cost-cutting, opportunities where suddenly we don't need people because we can just have these buildings full of books and we don't need people in there. So I think smart library is something to keep an eye on. I think there's some questions that get raised with these other services as well. So one of those questions I think we need to look at is if the money from these companies that we are working with are heavily invested in AI and other parts of their business, do we need to keep an eye on that? Does that matter if they are heavily invested? If they are, it will eventually come to our side of the business. And if they are doing things with AI and other parts of their business that have ethical, intellectual property, whatever concerns, then we may need to keep an eye on that. I think another question, and I've mentioned this if any of my Sage friends are on here or other vendors that I've had this conversation with, it's tricky to know what pot of money some of these tools come out of. If they are providing something that isn't content, right? Isn't a list of journal articles, but it is something, right, like Cite.ai, that is a tool, right, that is trained on this thing. Does the money come from collections budget? Does the money come from other budgets? So I think that's something libraries are going to have to wrestle with. Some of these are tools more than they are content, and our budget structures may need to think about that. I think we also need to keep an eye out for AI changing the products that we've come to rely on. Right now, if I'm working with a student and I go into our discovery layer and we set the same limits and we put in the same search terms, we're getting the same things, even when we're logged into our system. Is there going to be a trend towards changing that to where it is tailored to what the system already knows about you? So I think that's a concern in that if it's like, oh, hey, like last semester, you searched for things on this, and maybe I want to give you search results based on what I know about you. I think that could be something to keep an eye on. I think there are human factor things. Do they provide things that are currently being done by other people, by humans? And do we, I don't think we do really need to keep that in mind in terms of how that's going to change the jobs in libraries. And then there's obviously the privacy issue that can come on. So I will wrap up with just a couple of points, and then we will end this and look forward to your questions in the chat. We're going to see a lot more. I mean, we are about a year into the sort of beginning of this moral panic about ChatGPT. I think there's only going to be more and more sort of overt AI pitches from all over the library world, the use of AI and these things. So we need to be looking at them. I think there's going to be fundamental changes to things like peer review and publishing that come from this, determining, right, whether something should get published, that sort of thing. I'm keeping my eye on that. And then I do think there's going to be an element of this that's going to be a lot like the moral panic over Wikipedia, which is, oh my gosh, this is the end of libraries. Oh, wait, libraries haven't disappeared. Why haven't libraries disappeared? Oh, that's because we need people who understand these things to help guide us in this new environment. And so, you know, that's going to keep happening. And so I think that's good. But I also think that that's an opportunity for us, right? Here's another place like mis and disinformation, right, after 2016 or during the COVID pandemic, where we can step up and sort of explain the landscape, help people understand what these things are, what large language models are, what ChatGPT is, help students and faculty navigate some of these issues. And I think we are going to just have to keep looking at the privacy ethical issues that come with these things, because in order to build large language models, they have to have content to feed into large language models. And if that content is something that they want you to upload, then that has issues for the students and the faculty and the staff. And then finally, I think, and this will shake out, I think, long term, and I'm sure will be conversations at Charleston in the future, which is where can we leverage it to free up people to do other things, and how does that sort of reshape the library workforce writ large, and what other things might be out there that libraries could do in the future that we aren't doing now because of this. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Hope we've left some time for questions, and we look forward to your questions.